Hello, everyone. I'm Gail Persicelli, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today's ILTA webinar, Laying the Foundation for a Successful IT Project. Our speakers today are Ted Theodoropoulos, founder and president of AcroWire, and Paul Bedford, solution architect at AcroWire. I would also like to thank them for sponsoring today's webinar. Their sponsorship is vital in keeping the ILTA webinars free to our members. Today's presentation will run about 45 to 60 minutes. Please submit all questions to the Q&A box, and if those are not answered during the presentation, we will address them at the end. Before we start with the question portion of the webinar, we will be asking you to complete a short poll on evaluating today's presentation. Please take a few moments to complete this poll. Okay. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar and will post a link to our website under recordings shortly after today's presentation. I will now turn over the webinar to Ted and Paul.
Thank you, Gail. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our presentation today, which we're going to talk about several foundational steps that really must be taken if you want to maximize the likelihood of a positive outcome. And just to kind of give you some perspective on our experience in the IT project world, we've built and perfected this process through executing on literally thousands of projects. And, you know, there's plenty of project frameworks out there, existing frameworks that exist today. The challenge with many of those is balancing the right amount of rigor and keeping the process lean sometimes gets lost. So, you know, I've personally had formal training on many of these, including Lean Six Sigma, Scrum, PMBOK, and others. And, you know, they've either been too rigid or too heavy or disproportionately focused on the strategy piece or the execution piece of the project. So what we're going to outline here is a process and a discrete set of deliverables that are going to help you eliminate the biggest pitfalls that we see time and time again. And this is especially true in law firms, and we'll explain why that dynamic exists as well. So before we get into the content, let's just do some quick introductions. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, founder and president of AcroWire. I've been in the technology business for many years. I had stints at Microsoft on the SQL team and at Bank of America in several risk management roles, including IT audit and operational risk management. I've been lucky enough to get nominated for ILTA's Vendor Thought Leader of the Year 2 years in a row, and I'm also a certified Scrum Master and Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. And I'll let Paul introduce himself.
Thanks, Ted. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Bedford. I'm a solution architect at AcroWire. I've been working with Microsoft technology for 30 years and with SharePoint for 15 years, since before it was called SharePoint, when it was known as Portal Server. I work with large enterprises and SMEs as well, and I've been working with law firms for around about 4 years.
Okay, and so let's introduce AcroWire as well. So AcroWire is an IT consulting firm, and we do a significant amount of work in legal services. We do several webinars like this every year, as well as roadshows through ILTA. I write articles for peer-to-peer and white papers, and speak at ILTA conferences on legal IT topics. So most of the work that we do revolves around the Microsoft technology stack. You know, as you can see here on this slide, the primary areas of practice are SharePoint and application development on the implementation side. And you know, while there are plenty of vendors out there who can build solutions on Microsoft technologies, what makes us different in the market is our focus on legal. You know, the knowledge that we bring to the table, non-legal focused vendors can't. So, you know, we can tell you what other firms have tried and found success with. We also know about some of the failures. We know all the systems your firm uses, so your DMS, your CRM, your finance system. And this is an important one, understanding firm culture and how to operate most effectively within it. Law firms are very unique in that aspect when it comes to culture, and you know, not knowing how to navigate through it can be a challenge. I think most importantly, however, is our commitment to legal. And every AcroWire customer must be a happy customer. ILTA is a great mechanism for sharing feedback, and you guys take great advantage of that. So, as one of our CIO clients put it, if you screw up, everybody's going to know about it. So we make sure that that we deliver successfully when engaging with law firms. Whereas, vendor down the street, they can just move on to another prospect. On the IT strategy side of the house, we have an envisioning engagement. SharePoint and application development, fairly straightforward. We're going to talk today about a lot of what we do during envisioning, and there are some components of this that are completely unique to AcroWire. Some of the wireframes and surveys that we've built over time to collect feedback. But many of these steps you can employ yourself if you have the bandwidth. Really, where we come in is by implementing project leadership, and we see a lot of IT projects that get handicapped during the planning phase of the process. So we, when possible, like to get brought in early on an initiative so that we can lay that solid foundation and build a reasonable cost estimate and project timeline so that you can set expectations properly with your stakeholders. So the agenda for today, we've done introductions. We're going to talk about 3 metrics that we're going to use to measure success. We're going to do a quick poll to see how what the IT project success rate looks like from your perspective. And then we're going to look at some industry numbers. We're going to talk about why projects fail, how they can succeed, and then we're going to step through actionable steps towards success. So let's jump in and say and level set for a minute on exactly what we mean by successful project. There are many different ways to measure success, but for purposes of this webinar, we're going to say that a project is successful if it meets user requirements, it's delivered on time, and it's delivered on budget. Folks on the phone who have a PM background might recognize these dimensions as the 3 sides of the iron triangle, or the theory of triple constraints. There are other important measures that you could use to measure success. User adoption is certainly one. But if you get these things right, you're well on your way. For example, user adoption. If you build a system that truly solves business problems and it meets user requirements, adoption is naturally going to fall into place. So, our philosophy is, as a general rule, your chain of command is going to see most projects that achieve these 3 things as successful. So what I'd like to do is I would like to get the perspective of the audience and get a feel for what percentage of IT projects are successful from your perspective. And what I want you to think about is throughout your career. It doesn't have to be just at your current firm or your previous firm, but throughout your career, how many IT projects that you've either indirectly or directly been a part of have you seen success? Is it 1 to 25%, 26 to 50, 50 to 75, or 76 to 100? And Gail, do we have that poll? There we go. Okay, and the numbers look pretty optimistic. 51 to 75%, looks like 53% of you fall into that category. 76 to 100, 25%. So 78% of the folks on the phone have seen more than half of their projects be successful based on those 3 measures, and that's great. I would say that if you look at industry numbers, which we're going to do here on the next slide, it paints a slightly different picture. So the first 3 numbers are from the Project Management Institute, and 45% of projects don't meet deadlines, a third don't meet business objectives, and 42% don't get delivered on budget. And the second set of numbers in the maroon block there is from a report put out by the Standish Group, and 61% of IT projects are considered challenged or complete failures. So challenged means didn't meet one or more of those business objectives, deadlines or budgets, criteria, or just got completely scrapped altogether. So, and honestly, those numbers align pretty well with what we've seen in many industries and certainly within legal. So let's take a look. This is the reality of things. These are real numbers. Let's take a look at why this happens and what the challenges are specifically in legal. So this is a real life example of how a project went for a particular client of ours, but this pattern itself we see over and over again. So generically, this pattern fits, and it's probably happened somewhere in your environment today. So this was a law firm intranet portal, and someone at the firm, decided that there needed to be a new portal. It landed in IT's lap, as it often does, and IT initiates the project. We've put our first red flag on the third block there because if I put red flags on all of them, I think it would be distracting because of so many failure modes on each of these steps. But we just want to kind of highlight here that the challenges begin early, because typically what happens is IT gathers feedback for that new intranet portal from the folks that they can, get to the table. So willing participants, and then they move forward with a partial view of what's required, and they kick off the vendor selection process. Sometimes that takes the form of an RFP. Sometimes it's just, conversations and reference checking. But, vendors typically in the next step put together proposals or respond to those RFPs with a limited picture of what really needs to be done. And the numbers, the estimates that they provide are full of assumptions. So based on that, sometimes firms take a look at cost in terms of making vendor selection, sometimes not, but ultimately the vendors are selected on unclear criteria. And it's not just unclear, it's incomplete. So how can you adequately pick a vendor if you don't have a fully baked inventory of requirements? Because those are really going to dictate what capabilities the vendor needs to have. So we see the vendor selection process sometimes hamstrung early on, and then the execution phase begins. The project execution is kicked off, framework decisions are made. In the intranet portal world, that's, hey, are we going to use Handshake or BA Insight, Prosperaware? Development begins, and then iteration 0 is produced and ready based on the requirements that they were able to gather. What invariably happens is the delay events phase of the project begins, and new stakeholders, that starts off with new stakeholders coming out of the woodwork and saying, wait a second, this portal is doing this way when I need it to do it that way. And ultimately new requirements surface, and it's back to the drawing board in terms of strategy. You have to reevaluate your strategy and decide, hey, based on these new requirements, can the frameworks that we incorporated get us across the goal line? So an example here might be, let's say we didn't have a full set of requirements from our finance team, and we rolled out a framework that has limited BI capabilities as part of the portal, and the CFO or somebody else starts kicking around on it and go, hey, if financial reporting is going to be in scope, we need drill downs, we need the ability to cut across measures and dimensions, and the framework that you had chosen may not be the best fit for the project. And the problem is, as you can see from the highlighted block there, 40% of your budget is gone at this point. So you're going to have to redefine your strategy and your requirements, and then cross your fingers and do what we call wash, rinse, and repeat. And this is going to continue to happen until full user requirements are in play. So let us show you what a process looks like that we see consistently winning results with. So firm decides that they need a new law firm portal. The first thing that happens is a cross-disciplinary team is assembled. So this can be someone from HR, someone from finance, someone from KM, someone from IT, someone from marketing. Any stakeholder group who's going to have needs with respect to that intranet portal needs to have some sort of representation there at the table. End users are queried for objectives and requirements. The reality is, unless you're in the smallest of small firms, which most of you aren't, you're not going to be able to talk to every user of the system. But there are methods to ensure that you get a representative sample, and you can survey the full population with things like electronic surveys, and we've seen great success with that. Very early on, a project charter outlining the business objectives for the project needs to be complete. You need an inventory of user stories, and you need a risk assessment in terms of, hey, this really hasn't been done before in XYZ area. We need to keep our eye on it and make sure that that we're heading down the right path. Wireframes are a great tool that need to be brought on during the planning phase of the project. UX style tiles, which dictate color palette, textures, fonts, all of those sorts of things, are also a very good idea to incorporate during planning. And then from that, you build what's called a solution concept. In a solution concept, the concept is an operative word there, because it's a conceptual design of what the solution will look like. So it's going to, in this portal scenario, it's going to be a SharePoint-based intranet. We're going to have, a 3-server farm with high availability, which means we're going to need 6 servers. We're going to deploy with a hybrid topology, which means we need an Office 365 tenant, so on and so forth. It's not an engineering spec that you go hand to, a development team to deploy. It's a conceptual design. Also, information architecture. And we're going to talk in detail about a lot of these, so I don't want to steal too much of Paul's thunder. But IA is the navigational framework that your application or portal leverages. And then from all of those deliverables, your infrastructure team then has what they need to get a general sense of what sort of supporting infrastructure is going to be required. How much disk RAM and bandwidth are we going to need to support this environment? And then execution begins, again, based on a full inventory of the requirements. And when iteration 0 is released, users coming out of the woodwork are going to be much less likely. And as you can see down there, that's kind of the checklist in the bottom right. If you go about the process this way, you're going to maximize your odds for winning over your key stakeholders, because you're going to be talking about things in their terms, and you're going to prevent triggers for rework. You're going to avoid moving timelines. You're going to maximize your odds of delivering on budget. And we should put an asterisk next to budget, because depending on the size of the initiative, there's a certain amount of assumptions that are baked into that budget number, and those assumptions may or may not hold up as the project unfolds. However, so one thing has to be flexible: scope or budget. Timeline, you can move as well, but you have to have a little bit of flexibility around that. This is really about maximizing odds of success. And then, of course, meeting your user requirements is a must, and following this process really helps accomplish that. Okay, so that's great. Where do I start? And we've seen a successful process start with an understanding on how to articulate business problems that your project aims to solve. So rather than saying our firm's intranet is outdated and needs refreshing, state things in business terms. So in this scenario, how is having an outdated intranet impacting the business? Because an outdated intranet by itself isn't a business problem. Maybe the portal running on an unsupported operating system or an older version of SharePoint, that represents operational risk. That's a business problem. Maybe the user experience is substandard and adoption is low, and users are resorting to less efficient ways of collaborating, like through email. That's a business problem. Maybe users can't find the information that they're looking for, and that's impacting productivity. Those are business problems that are much more likely to generate buy-in and get stakeholder involvement. And if you do that up front, you're going to maximize your success down the road. And really the first step in that is project charter, and I'm going to let Paul jump in and talk about that.
Thanks, Ted. So a project charter is going to be the way that you articulate the business need for the project. It should link the project to the firm's overall strategy, and it's going to act kind of like a marketing document within your firm. It's how you're going to sell the project to the stakeholders and get them engaged and excited about your project. Some of the key parts of the project charter, I mean, people have lots of opinions about what should be in and what should be not, but you certainly want to include a list of the stakeholders and their requirements that you know at the beginning of the project. You should attempt to establish some quantifiable criteria that the project needs to meet to be considered a success. You would also want to have some kind of high-level definition of what is in and what is out of scope, and obviously a timeline for the project to be implemented. You also want to think about establishing roles and responsibilities at this point. Pull together a multidisciplinary project team from across both the technical side of the firm, but also the business side as well. So getting the people to the table. This is the number one area we hear pushback on all the time, that I won't be able to get everyone to the table. Timekeepers are just too busy. Not having everyone at the table for your envisioning is seriously going to hamper the ability to deliver successfully. You have to find a way to do this. Encourage your C-level people to participate and to show engagement, and kind of push down from the top. It's just very important. Don't forget admins and support staff. That they sometimes get left away from the table, but they can bring some very unique perspectives on things. You should also consider establishing subgroups within this team to focus on very specific areas that might need some very specific expertise. Dashboards and KPIs, reporting, that kind of area is a good example of that. All that being said, you're not, as Ted said, you're not going to reach everyone in the firm. And so this is where a survey can come in and help. It's a great way to gather wider input. There are some rules of the road to follow here to get the best adoption or the best feedback. Make sure it's anonymous so people don't feel they're being, checked on or compared. And make sure your questions are not rhetorical or duplicative. And make sure they're easy and intuitive to understand. Simpler is better every single time. You don't want people having to figure out how to interpret a question. So no matter who is reading it, from the top of your firm to the bottom, they should understand that question very clearly. And you want to follow good scientific guidelines. So word the questions similarly, use a similar scale. Make sure the scale is granular enough to get precision, but not so detailed that people get bored or frustrated and just don't complete the survey, give up. I would also suggest giving participants the ability to add color and expand. Let them give them areas where they can write some notes or give you more detailed information if there's something they want to tell you as well. Ted also talked about user stories. These are really, really important and are a good way to define the use of the portal. Now, some of these may exist already anecdotally in the firm, but I would encourage you to brainstorm with the project team what kind of user stories you think are important. So you know, as the slide says, a user story describes the type of user, what they want, and why. And there's some examples here as a practice lead. What's my group's profitability, and how does it compare to the other groups? So that's a very specific and very quantifiable measure. Maybe have some focus groups. You know, get some input from the business, and these will also help build test cases for the end of the project when you're getting ready to deliver that you actually did meet the business requirements. So it's kind of a dual use here. The next piece of the jigsaw puzzle is around user experience. And we always find it's very useful to create some low fidelity concepts and wireframes. So we don't want any color or fonts, etc. We don't want to distract. We want the users to look at these concepts to promote thought about what can be achieved and where things should be, the content and structure of the portal in this instance. And they're a great tool to socialize around groups of people, to allow people to, allow features to be clarified and make sure that everybody's focused on usability as well. And they will save time and help streamline the design process. Alongside of this, we've talked about style guides, input from marketing. Make sure that your portal is aligned with the firm brand and consistent as well. So that's another piece of this jigsaw puzzle. The next piece is information architecture. Now, I could talk for an hour on information architecture on its own, and it's something that is very dear to my heart. It's something I spend a lot of time talking about, but I'm going to try and keep this short and succinct. Why is IA important? It's a way for making sense of complexity, essentially. Typical problems with bad IA are, too much information. It's overwhelming. Navigation is overwhelming. People can't find what they're looking for very easily. Too many clicks, things like that. Maybe there's not the right information. We think we know what people want, but we don't really know what the users want in their navigation, or limited understanding, and there's no signals for people to follow. There are three legs, if you will, to IA. The ontology, which is meaning, and I would summarize this by saying, do you know what you mean when you say what you say? Meaning is complex. It's interpretive, demographics, social, political, structure. Everybody has a different idea of what meaning is, realistically, so it can be quite loose. You want your IA to use terms that represent the knowledge within your domain, and in this instance, it's your law firm. The next piece of this is taxonomy, which is the structure. Have you provided a logical structure that brings meaning to what we're presenting on the portal? You can classify things really in only 5 ways. So location, by location, and an example that would be Rome is a city in Europe. Alphabetically, Rome starts with the letter R. Some kind of time. Rome started in 753 BC. By category, Rome is a romantic city, or a hierarchy. So Rome is a city in Italy, which is within Europe, which is within the eastern and northern hemispheres. So they're your choices really for organization. And the organizing really is not the hard part, but the hardest part is building a consensus across your team, your users, your stakeholders of what that structure should be, what the organization should be. The final piece of information architecture is choreography. And by this I mean intent. So how is meaning affected by the channel? So channels, how are people accessing your portal? So a mobile view is different to a desktop view. So we need to be clear about the context that we're showing information in those two in different ways of accessing the information, and how people will interact with that with the device, if it's a mobile device, or interact with the portal on a desktop. So that's a quick summary of IA. It's just really, really, really important to get right. The next piece is infrastructure. Most of this is I'm sure, going to be pretty obvious to everybody, but you just want to make sure that you are building the infrastructure that supports not only today but tomorrow where you're going to go. So if you're thinking about hybrid, might be somewhere. If you're thinking about the cloud is somewhere you might be in 2 years or 3 years, it's probably a good idea to start building some of that foundation today in the project, so that in 2 years' time you don't have to wipe everything clean and start again. Make sure you include any scalability or availability if you're aware of for a merger that's coming up, or an expansion of the firm, opening new offices. Make sure those are factored in as well, and be cognizant of the geographic footprint of your organization as well, to make sure that no matter where you are, head office or in outlying offices, your users get the best experience possible. The next piece is third-party tools and technologies. Everybody knows SharePoint is a great place to begin, but it's not the end. And there are lots of vendors out there which provide great value-added additions to SharePoint. I would suggest you base your evaluations on, again, specific business requirements, not just the technical requirements. And don't rely on marketing demonstrations. I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but we've seen, instances where people have seen a really great shiny demo, move forward with it, and actually the reality is somewhat different than the marketing presentation. Great way to avoid that kind of problem is to spend some time and invest in a proof of concept. And where vendors want to charge you for that, again, I would suggest that you should be wary, because vendors really should be confident of their technology and be prepared to help you get the knowledge you need to implement and support the technologies after they leave. Talk to your existing users. I know Ilsa's got a great set of tools for that, and boards, etc. Get real feedback, candid feedback, not just a vendor's tame, if you like, references.
Hey, Paul, I just wanted to jump in and add one point. So, we've been talking about, we've been using a law firm intranet as our basis, as an example that we've been talking through, but this could be any IT project. So, for example, third-party tools in an application development scenario could be what JavaScript libraries, even though there's no vendors involved in most scenarios, are you going to use Angular 1.4, or are you going to wait until Angular 2 comes out, which is completely different? Are you going to use Telerik Kendo UI controls? Are you going to use, in a business intelligence context, are you going to use something like SQL reporting services, Tableau for ad hoc reporting? So this is not SharePoint or portal specific. This is really any technology product. And I would say we see more challenges with the wrong third-party tools being selected than probably any other issue in our whole process there. So just to kind of hammer home Paul's point on this, make sure that you're leveraging the resources that ILTA provides you. Post on those message boards. If you're getting a marketing message that you don't need technical resources on the law firm side to manage the framework, for example, that's a really important thing to know. And if that marketing message is out of line with reality, you can end up with a six-figure resource that you didn't know that you needed. So post to the forums and ask other law firms that have implemented that solution, and maybe the message is aligned with reality, maybe not, but I would encourage you to use those tools.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. It's definitely what first, not how first. How should follow on from the what. So following on from this, we have you really need to establish a risk assessment, or do a risk assessment as you're going through your envisioning. Decide what are going to be the risks to the project. PMI defines risk as an uncertain event or condition that has a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. So, I mean, a risk can be anything: people, process, technology, and resources. So the first step is to identify potential risks, create a list of the possible risks and the opportunities, as well as risks. Because if you don't consider opportunities, you may miss you may miss something that you could be including, which you maybe haven't thought about. So it's both sides of the fence, if you like. Try and estimate when an event might occur. If people have vacation booked, simply, that's a simple one. Try, put that in the timeline. Determine the probability of the event. What are the odds a certain risk will occur? It's more likely that a key team member will be out for a week, with the flu, than he's going to develop total amnesia. So, rate your risks, high, medium, and low. You need to also determine the impact of the risk. What would happen if each one occurred? Would your final delivery date get pushed back? Would the budget get busted? Identify, which are the biggest risks to your project's outcome, and rate them. Again, high, medium, or low. And try and foresee and identify any triggers that would cause an event to happen, a risk event to happen, or would forewarn of a risk event to happen as well. Nobody can look around corners, but spend some time doing the best you can with this, because it's very important. And then you need to manage the risks during the project, of course, as well. So at the end of all this effort, we will have a solution concept, which, as Ted said, it's not an engineering document; it is a concept. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with game theory, but in game theory, a solution concept is a, I'm going to quote this, is a formal rule for predicting how a game will be played. The predictions are called solutions and describe which strategies will be adopted by players and therefore the result of the game. So think about your project as a game. Your players, your users, and your development team, and your solution concept should describe the best approach to addressing the requirements that the organization has set forth and you've captured during your revisioning, and you're going to make appropriate recommendations based on that input. Now, of course, you only know what you know at the time you know it, and you may find that even though you fully understand the current problem domain and functional scope, other things are going to occur after the event. You can't completely, as I said, see around corners. But what you have here is a concept based in fact, not in just fiction or thought. So following from the solution concept, we would want to produce a project plan. It's a high-level project plan. It's with milestones, the major components of the project, their interdependencies, and a time frame as well. You should be able to establish the resourcing requirements for your project from all these activities as well, and be able to include the timing and allow for schedule planning so that again, you don't have constraints from that. And again, it will be possible now to establish a firm cost estimate based on the full and complete understanding of what it is you're trying to do, rather than just a swag, which you may only be able to do if you don't do any of this work. So your projects, your project goals and requirements are much more reliable. And that's it.
So, now you guys have seen kind of the sequence, you've seen the tools, you've had a description of why they're important, and now you hopefully have an understanding of how these tools can be used to ensure project success. I would say that the sequence, there are dependencies in this process, so you can't build a project plan before you build a solution concept. You can't build a cost estimate until you have a project plan. You can't build a solution concept until you have requirements, or user stories. So these things need to happen in a certain sequence, and it's important that if you're not comfortable with how to go about this, to get help. You could get help from other areas, project management offices within your organization. You could pull in help from outside your firm with consulting with companies like AcroWire. But just make sure that you're going about it in the right sequence, because the cart can get ahead of the horse, which can cause problems. If you do decide you'd like outside help, please consider our envisioning service offering. So what we would bring to the table that you wouldn't have if you did this on your own is essentially a toolkit and experience using the process. So, for example, on the law firm intranet side of the house, we have about 2 or 3 dozen existing low fidelity wireframes that show exactly all the different possibilities that exist in that scenario. We have about 80 user stories, and we also have pre-baked user surveys, like Paul was alluding to, that incorporated all of those best practices on how to effectively survey users. Because something else to keep in mind is you get one shot. So if you send out surveys and they're not structured properly, and you don't get the feedback you're looking for, sending another one is not going to go over well. So our goal is to start you off on the 40-yard line, to use a football analogy, instead of 2 yards deep in your own end zone. So envision engagements are inexpensive, and they certainly pay for themselves by eliminating rework. So with that, let's open it up to Q&A. Paul, I've got a question here that's definitely in your realm of expertise, and it is, could you talk about information architecture if not dealing with an intranet?
Yes. Not sure what the context is in generally, but IA is all about people being able to find things, people being able to understand what's going on. That might be a question better have interactively, perhaps, because I'm not quite sure where you want to go with it. But it's all about having people understand what they're looking at and what they're interacting with. The place of understanding, if you will, is between knowledge and wisdom. So, you understand things because of through experience, and then by understanding them more deeply, you get an intimate understanding of what's going on. We're trying to get you there very quickly with IA, essentially.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So, when you're talking about information architecture, like Paul said, it's finding resources, and let's just say a custom app scenario. How are your users going to go about navigating to the resources that they're trying to find? We've seen scenarios where it doesn't happen in legal too often, but in other industries where where companies get too ahead of the curve, Like many of you are probably familiar with the hamburger menu, which is those 3 horizontal bars. They look like a little mini hamburger. I've seen websites that when you go to the website, you see a big splash image and then a little hamburger over to the left, and that's it. Well, you know, a good rule of thumb is if your mother went to that site and didn't know how to get to what she needed to, then you might have a problem. So common sense scenarios like that are obvious, but you know, proper IA does get into a lot of intricate detail, and it certainly is applicable outside of just intranet scenarios.
Yeah, I don't want to hog this, but I quite often use it. You know, it really takes knowledge to know that a tomato is not a fruit, but it takes wisdom to not put the tomato in a fruit salad. That's kind of encapsulates what the problem IA is trying to solve.
Okay, and we had some other questions, but they were answered in line via text, mostly around how to get slides or access to the presentation after. And I think the rest of those questions are for you, Gail.
Okay, and thanks, Ted and Paul, and I went ahead and answered them privately, so we're good to go. All right. Thank you again, Ted and Paul, for the great presentation. Lots of information. And I just want to thank AccuWire again for sponsoring. And a copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be posted with the recording on our website. That was a question that we were asked. And you can find that in a few days on our website under resources and recordings. Okay. Thank you again for taking time to answer the poll that I put up. A lot of good information that we're getting back. But you will shortly, after the webinar, receive the old-fashioned email evaluation. If you could take time to complete that, I would appreciate that also. Thanks again to our speakers and for all of you for attending today's webinar. Keep an eye on our website under Resources tab for any upcoming webinars and meeting info. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars, and as ILTA's Executive Director, Randy Mays, always says, tell a friend about ILTA. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.